Commander Jake Morrison walked down the cold metal hallway of the stellar dawn. His boots made soft sounds on the ship floor as he moved toward the holding area. The message from his security team had been strange, and he still could not believe what they told him. A Vrex prisoner wanted to talk to him, and only him. Morrison had fought the Vrex Empire for 5 years now. He knew them well. They were tall aliens with gray skin and 4 arms. They had sharp teeth and black eyes that showed no feeling. When captured, they usually said nothing or tried to escape. They never asked to talk to human commanders. This was new, and Morrison did not like new things when it came to enemies. The holding area doors opened with a soft hiss. Morrison saw Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez waiting for him. She was the ship's expert on alien minds and behavior. Her face looked worried, which made Morrison feel more nervous about this meeting. "Commander, the prisoner has been asking for you for 3 hours now," Rodriguez said in a quiet voice. "He knows your name and your rank. He even knows about some of your past battles. This is not normal behavior for a Vrex fighter." Morrison looked through the clear wall into the holding cell. Inside sat a large Vrex warrior covered in old battle scars. The alien's gray skin showed marks from laser burns and blade cuts. One of his 4 arms hung differently than the others, as if it had been broken many times. This was clearly a veteran fighter who had seen many wars. "What does he want?" Morrison asked while studying the prisoner. "He says he has stories to tell you about human wars. He claims he has fought against humans 7 times in different star systems. The strange part is that he seems scared when he talks about it. I have never seen a Vrex show fear before." Morrison frowned. The Vrex were known for being fearless in battle. They charged into fights that would make other aliens run away. Fear was not something they usually showed, especially not to their enemies. "Has he tried to escape or hurt anyone?" Morrison asked. "No, sir. He has been sitting in the same spot since we brought him in. He barely moves except to ask for you. The medical scans show high stress levels in his body. Something has really bothered this one." Morrison made his choice. "Open the cell. I want to talk to him, but you stay close and keep the guards ready." The cell door slid open and Morrison stepped inside. The Vrex warrior looked up at him with those black eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Morrison had stared down many enemies before, but something about this alien's look made him feel uncomfortable. "You are Commander Jake Morrison of the human fleet," the Vrex said in perfect human language. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "I am. What do you want to tell me?" Morrison replied, keeping his voice steady. The Vrex shifted. His large body, and Morrison could see that the alien was struggling with something. "My name is Zektar. I have fought in wars across the galaxy for 20 years. I have killed enemies from 12 different species. I have destroyed ships and conquered planets. But fighting humans has changed me in ways I cannot explain." Morrison crossed his arms. "Go on. Your species fights differently than any other. When we attack other aliens, they follow patterns we understand. They retreat when outnumbered. They surrender when defeat is certain. They protect themselves first before others. But humans do not follow these rules. You fight like you have lost your minds, but in a way that somehow works." Zektar stood up slowly. Even sitting, he had been tall, but now Morrison had to look up to meet his eyes. "I have seen things in battles against humans that keep me awake during my rest periods. I have watched your people do things that should not be possible. Things that my commanders refuse to believe when I report them." "What kind of things?" Morrison asked. "I have seen a single human soldier hold off an entire Vrex squad for hours, using nothing but broken equipment and clever tricks. I have watched human ships continue fighting after they should have been destroyed. I have seen your people risk everything to save one wounded friend, even when it made no tactical sense." Zektar's voice grew quieter. In my last battle against humans, I realized something that terrifies my leaders. We cannot defeat you through normal warfare. You adapt too quickly. You care too much about each other. You fight like every battle might be your last, but also like you have nothing to lose. Morrison felt a chill run down his back. This was not what he had expected from a captured enemy fighter. "Why are you telling me this?" Morrison asked. "Because I believe my people need to understand what they are really fighting against. These stories I carry are not just about battles won or lost. They are about why humans are dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with your weapons or ships." Rodriguez stepped closer to the cell entrance. Morrison could see she was recording everything. "I want to share these stories with you," Zektar continued. 7 battles, where I learned that humans fight wars differently than anyone else in the galaxy. Stories that might help both our species understand why this conflict between us can never be won through force alone. Zektar settled back against the cell wall and closed his black eyes for a moment. Morrison could see the alien's breathing change, as if he was preparing himself for something difficult. "The first time I truly understood how different humans are was at Kepler Station," Zektar began. It was a mining operation on the edge of human space. 50,000 workers and their families lived there. The station was built into a large asteroid and had been mining rare metals for 10 years. Morrison knew about Kepler Station. Every human in the fleet knew that story. It had become legend among human forces, but he had never heard it from the enemy side. Our fleet arrived with 40 ships and 20,000 warriors. The station had only 800 human marines for defense. By all military logic, they should have evacuated immediately. The civilians could have been moved to safety, and the marines could have regrouped with the main human fleet. Zektar opened his eyes and looked directly at Morrison. But Captain Lisa Wright made a choice that changed everything. She decided to defend the station. When our commanders sent the standard surrender demand, she sent back a message that said, "Come and take it if you can." The alien warrior shifted his position, and Morrison could see old pain in his movements. "We thought it would be over in days. How could 800 Marines hold a mining station against our entire fleet? We had superior weapons, better armor, and 25 times more fighters. It should have been simple." "What happened?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the basic story. "Your Captain Wright turned that mining station into a fortress that defied all military sense. She used the mining equipment as weapons. The rock-cutting lasers became anti-ship guns. The ore-hauling vehicles became mobile artillery. The transport tunnels became ambush points where human marines could appear and disappear like ghosts." Zektar's voice grew quieter. "But the equipment was not the real problem. The problem was how the humans used their minds. They planned everything 3 steps ahead. When we cut their power, they switched to backup systems we did not know existed. When we blocked their communications, they used the mining tunnel acoustics to send messages through sound waves." Morrison felt pride rising in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. He wanted to hear more about how his people had fought. After the first week, our commanders became frustrated. They sent more ships and warriors, but the results were the same. The humans seemed to know where we would attack before we did. They would be waiting in the exact right spots with the exact right defenses. "The civilians helped them," Morrison said. "Yes, but not in the way we expected. We thought the miners and their families would be a weakness that the Marines would have to protect. Instead, they became part of the defense. Children carried messages through tunnels too small for warriors. Old miners who knew every inch of the station guided Marine squads through secret passages. Women and men who had never held weapons learned to operate the mining equipment that Wright had turned into guns." Zektar stood up and began pacing in the small cell. Morrison could see that these memories still bothered him greatly. By the second month, we realized we were not fighting 800 Marines. We were fighting 50,000 humans who all worked together like parts of one big machine. Every person on that station had a job in the defense. Everyone knew what to do when we attacked. "What impressed you the most?" Morrison asked. The alien stopped pacing and looked at Morrison with an expression that might have been respect. "The way your people refused to abandon their wounded. In one battle, my squad managed to hurt 3 human Marines badly. They were trapped in a mining tunnel with no way out. By our military thinking, those 3 humans were lost, and their friends should have moved on to more important targets. Zektar's voice became almost a whisper. Instead, 12 Marines spent 2 days fighting through our defensive positions to reach their wounded friends. They lost 4 more Marines in the rescue, but they got those 3 out alive. We had never seen anything like it. In Vrek's military doctrine, you do not risk 12 warriors to save 3 who are already lost. Morrison nodded. This was exactly the kind of behavior that made humans dangerous opponents. They never left anyone behind if there was any choice. The rescue mission cost us more than just the Marines we lost fighting it, Zektar continued. It showed all the humans on the station that their leaders would never abandon them. It made them fight harder because they knew their friends would come for them no matter what happened. How did the siege end? Morrison asked. After 6 months, human reinforcements arrived. Admiral Carter brought a fleet that was smaller than ours, but they fought like they had learned from what happened at Kepler Station. They used the same tactics on a larger scale. Unpredictable attacks, careful planning, and weapons that should not have worked, but somehow did. Zektar sat back down and looked at his hands. By the time the siege ended, we had lost 15 ships and 8,000 warriors. The humans lost 200 Marines and about 1,000 civilians. But the real loss for us was not the numbers. It was the knowledge that everything we thought we knew about siege warfare was wrong. The station still operates today, Morrison said. Yes, and Captain Wright is now Admiral Wright. She commands one of your most important fleets. The miners went back to their work, and their families continued their lives, but they also kept the defense systems that Wright built. Kepler Station is now one of the most protected places in human space. Morrison could see that Zektar was tired from telling this story. The alien looked older somehow, as if remembering. The battle had aged him. This was when I first understood that humans do not just fight to win battles, Zektar said. You fight to protect something bigger than yourselves. Your families, your friends, your way of life. This makes you dangerous because you will never stop fighting as long as those things are threatened. Morrison felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because his people had shown such courage and cleverness. Sadness because it had taken so much pain and death to teach the lesson. Zektar rubbed his scarred face with one of his large hands. Morrison could see that the alien was choosing his words carefully for the next story. 6 months after Kepler Station, I was sent to Tau Ceti III for what our commanders called a simple ground operation. The planet was covered in thick jungle and dangerous wildlife. Our technology was perfect for this kind of environment. We had heat sensors that could see through the trees and armor that protected us from the local animals. The alien warrior looked at Morrison with what might have been bitter humor. The humans had landed 2,000 soldiers on that planet 3 weeks before we arrived. We expected to find them easily and destroy them quickly. Jungle warfare was supposed to be our strength because Vrek's soldiers are trained to fight in difficult terrain. Morrison leaned forward. He had heard rumors about the Tau Ceti campaign, but never the complete story from either side. Lieutenant. Colonel Pete Harrison was commanding the human forces. Our intelligence said he was a good officer, but nothing special. Just another human soldier who would follow standard tactics and try to hold defensive positions until help arrived. Zektar stood up and began his slow pacing again. We were wrong about everything. Harrison had not tried to hold any positions. Instead, he had broken his force into small groups that moved constantly through the jungle. They studied the planet, like scientists instead of fighting like soldiers. How do you study a planet during a war? Morrison asked. They learned which plants could hide their scent from our sensors. They figured out which animals were dangerous and which ones could be used as distractions. They mapped every stream, every hill, and every cave system. In 3 weeks, they knew that jungle better than we did after 2 months. The alien's voice grew frustrated. But the worst part was how they used our own tactics against us. We would set traps, and they would find them and turn them around to catch our soldiers. We would try to track them, and they would lead us into areas where the local wildlife would attack us instead of them. Morrison tried to imagine human soldiers working with alien jungle creatures. It sounded almost impossible, but he had learned not to underestimate what desperate humans could accomplish. "Tell me about the first major engagement," Morrison said. "My unit was tasked with hunting down a human squad led by Sergeant Kate Phillips. Intelligence said she had 30 soldiers with her, and they were trapped in a valley with no good escape routes. We had 60 warriors and support from aircraft. It should have been a quick elimination mission." Zektar stopped pacing and gripped the bars of his cell. Sergeant Phillips turned that hunt into a nightmare that lasted 2 weeks. Her soldiers had set up a network of traps and ambush points throughout the entire valley. But these were not normal military traps. They used the jungle itself as a weapon. "What do you mean?" Morrison asked. They had studied the local animals and learned their behavior patterns. There were creatures called spine cats that hunted in packs and could climb any surface. Phillips somehow trained a group of these animals to attack anything that smelled like Vrex armor. They used the scent of our equipment as bait to lead these creatures to our positions. Morrison felt his mouth drop open. Training alien predators was not something covered in any military manual he had ever read. There were also plants that released poisonous gas when disturbed. The humans marked all of these plants and used them to create gas barriers that we could not cross safely. They turned a natural defense system into their personal minefield. Zektar's black eyes seemed to look past Morrison as if he was seeing those events again. But the psychological warfare was worse than the physical traps. Phillips understood how Vrex minds work. She knew we pride ourselves on being superior hunters and fighters, so she made us feel like prey instead of predators. "How did she do that?" Morrison asked. "We would find evidence that the humans had been watching us, marks in trees that showed they had observed our camps, food that had been moved from our supplies, but not stolen, equipment that had been touched but not damaged. We started to feel like we were being hunted even when we were supposed to be the hunters." The alien shuddered, which Morrison had never seen a Vrex do before. The humans would make sounds in the night that mimicked local predators, but just slightly wrong. Our subconscious minds would register that something was not right, but we could never identify exactly what. It kept us awake and made us nervous during the day. Morrison was beginning to understand why this campaign had affected Zektar so deeply. The humans had gotten inside the heads of their enemies. On the 10th day of the hunt, we finally cornered what we thought was Phillips' squad, in a clearing surrounded by thick trees. We moved in with overwhelming force, expecting to end the mission. Instead, we found empty equipment and tracks that led in 6 different directions. "A decoy," Morrison said. "Yes, but while we were investigating the fake camp, the real humans attacked our main base 5 kilometers away. They had somehow moved through terrain we thought was impossible to cross and destroyed our supplies and communication equipment. They were gone before our support aircraft could respond." Zektar sat back down heavily. "That was when I realized we were not fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting humans who had become part of the jungle itself. They moved like animals, thought like predators, and used the environment like it was their own body." "What happened to your unit?" Morrison asked. "By the end of 2 weeks, we had lost 40 of our 60 warriors. We never killed more than 3 humans, and we were never sure if we actually killed them or if they just made us think we did. The survivors, including me, were evacuated for medical and psychological treatment." Morrison could see the pain in Zektar's posture. This had clearly been a defeat that went beyond simple military loss. Sergeant Phillips and her squad continued operating in that jungle for 6 more months. They trained local resistance fighters and established supply networks that our forces could never completely destroy. When we finally withdrew from Tau, Seti III, the humans controlled more territory than when we had arrived. "What did you learn from that campaign?" Morrison asked. Zektar looked directly at Morrison with an expression that might have been fear or respect or both. "I learned that humans can adapt to any environment and turn any situation to their advantage." You do not just fight with weapons and tactics. You fight with your minds and your ability to become whatever you need to be to survive. This makes you the most dangerous species in the galaxy because you can never be truly predicted or contained. Zektar was quiet for several minutes before continuing his stories. Morrison could see that each memory was difficult for the alien to share, but also that he felt compelled to tell them. After the jungle disaster on Tau Ceti, I was transferred to fleet duty aboard the dreadnought Void Render. Our commanders thought that space combat would be different. In space, there were no jungles for humans to hide in, and no animals for them to train. It would be ship against ship with superior Vrex technology and numbers. The alien warrior moved to the small window in his cell and looked out at the stars. We were sent to Proxima Centauri to destroy the human colony there. Our fleet had 35 major warships, including 5 dreadnoughts like mine. The human fleet defending the system had only 18 ships, and most of them were smaller vessels. Morrison knew this battle well. It was studied in every human naval academy as an example of innovative tactics defeating superior force. Admiral Nick Carter commanded the human fleet from his flagship Liberty's Edge. Our intelligence said he was experienced but conventional in his thinking. We expected him to form a standard battle line and try to engage our fleet directly. Zektar turned back to Morrison with that expression that mixed respect and frustration. Instead, Carter split his fleet into small groups that attacked from different directions at different times. This should have made them easier to destroy because we could focus our superior firepower on smaller targets. But somehow it made them harder to fight. How so? Morrison asked. The human ships moved like a pack of hunting animals. They would appear, strike quickly, and disappear before we could respond effectively. Our heavy weapons were designed to destroy large targets in direct combat, but they were too slow to track fast-moving ships that refused to stay in one place. Zektar began pacing again as his voice grew more animated. Carter's ships used the asteroid field around Proxima like it was their own territory. They hid behind rocks and used gravity wells to change direction in ways that our computers could not predict. They turned space debris into weapons by accelerating it toward our ships. Morrison had read about these tactics, but hearing them described by an enemy made them sound even more impressive. Our fleet commander, Admiral Thekvar, became frustrated after the first hour of battle. He ordered our ships to spread out and hunt down the human vessels individually. This played directly into Carter's plan. What happened next? Morrison asked. The humans had prepared for exactly this response. When our ships separated, they found themselves facing coordinated attacks from multiple directions. A small human destroyer would attack one of our cruisers from the front while 2 frigates hit it from behind and above. By the time our ship could turn to engage one attacker, the others had already done their damage and moved away. Zektar's voice became almost admiring. But the most impressive thing was how they used their damaged ships. In Vrek's fleet doctrine, a heavily damaged vessel withdraws from combat for repairs or evacuation. Human ships kept fighting even when they should have been destroyed. Morrison leaned forward with interest. This was something he wanted to understand better. I watched the human cruiser Defiant take a direct hit from our main guns that should have split it in half. The ship lost its main engines and most of its weapons. Our sensors showed massive hull breaches and life support failures. But it kept fighting, Morrison said. Yes, but not in any way we expected. Captain Ryan Foster used controlled explosions and gravity assist maneuvers to keep his ship moving. He turned the Defiant into a guided missile aimed at our command ship. We had to break formation and waste valuable time avoiding a ship that was supposedly crippled. Zektar sat down and rubbed his scarred arms. The Defiant never did ram our command ship, but it forced us to split our attention and resources. While we were dealing with Foster's dying cruiser, Carter's other ships hit our supply vessels and damaged our communications array. Morrison was impressed by the creativity and determination that story showed. Using a crippled ship as a psychological weapon was exactly the kind of thinking that made human tactics so unpredictable. The battle lasted 8 hours, and by the and our fleet was in complete disarray. We had started with a massive advantage in ship's weapons and personnel, but Admiral Carter had turned all of our strengths into weaknesses. "How many ships did each side lose?" Morrison asked. "We lost 12 major warships, including 2 dreadnoughts. The humans lost 7 ships, but 3 of those were so damaged they were considered total losses anyway. The real defeat was not in numbers, though. It was in the complete breakdown of our tactical doctrine." Zektar looked at Morrison with an expression that might have been sadness. "After Proxima, our fleet commanders had to admit that everything they knew about space combat was inadequate for fighting humans. Your species does not follow the rules that govern normal warfare." "What rules?" Morrison asked. "The rule that damaged ships withdraw from combat. The rule that smaller forces avoid direct engagement with larger ones. The rule that battles have clear winners and losers. Humans seem to believe that any battle can be won if you are creative enough and determined enough." The alien stood up and moved to the center of the cell. "I was a gunner on the Void Render throughout that battle. I fired our main weapons dozens of times at human ships. Sometimes I hit them and sometimes I missed. But even when I hit them, they would keep fighting in ways that made no sense." Morrison could hear frustration and respect in Zektar's voice. "The worst part for our crews was the psychological impact. We were trained to fight predictable enemies who followed logical tactics. Fighting humans was like trying to catch smoke with our hands. Every time we thought we understood their strategy, they would do something completely different." "What was the final result?" Morrison asked. "Admiral Thekvar ordered a retreat after losing a third of his fleet. The Proxima colony was saved, and Admiral Carter became famous throughout human space. But the real victory for humans was proving that superior numbers and technology could be defeated by superior thinking and courage." Zektar's voice became quiet again. "I served in space battles for 3 more years after Proxima, but I never felt confident again. Every time we faced human ships, I remembered how Carter's fleet had made fools of our best commanders and strongest ships. The knowledge that humans could find a way to win any battle made every engagement feel dangerous, even when we had overwhelming advantages." Morrison felt a deep pride in his species and their ability to innovate under pressure. But he also felt sympathy for Zektar, who had clearly been traumatized by experiences that challenged everything he had been taught about warfare. "The Battle of Proxima changed how both sides fought," Morrison said. "Yes, but it changed the Vrex more than the humans. You already knew how to adapt and improvise. We had to learn that our rigid military thinking was a weakness against an enemy who refused to be predictable. Some of our commanders never learned this lesson and continued to lose battles they should have won." Zektar walked to the back wall of his cell and leaned against it. Morrison could see that this next story was going to be particularly difficult for the alien to tell. 2 years after Proxima, I was assigned to ground forces again for the occupation of New Geneva. It was a human colony world with 2 million people living in one large city. Our fleet had bombarded the military installations, and the human garrison had surrendered after 3 days of fighting. Morrison had heard about New Geneva, but it was not considered one of the major battles of the war. Most reports described it as a successful Vrex occupation that lasted several months. The occupation should have been routine. We had 50,000 soldiers controlling a defeated civilian population. The human military was gone, and their government had officially surrendered. Our commanders expected minimal resistance and an easy transition to Vrex control. Zektar's voice became darker. What we found instead was Dr. Angela Torres, and the most effective urban resistance movement in galactic history. She was a former military engineer who had stayed behind when the garrison evacuated. In 3 weeks, she turned 2 million frightened civilians into a coordinated fighting force that made our occupation a living nightmare. Morrison leaned forward with interest. Civilian resistance was always difficult to deal with, but rarely effective against professional military forces. Dr. Torres understood something that our commanders did not. She knew that controlling a city is not the same as controlling the people who live in it. You can occupy buildings and patrol streets, but you cannot occupy minds and hearts. What did she do? Morrison asked. She organized the civilians into a network that used the city infrastructure against us. Every person had a role, even children and elderly citizens. They created a communication system using the underground utility, tunnels that we could not monitor or block. Zektar began pacing again, but his movements seemed more agitated than before. The resistance started small with minor acts of sabotage and misdirection. Equipment would malfunction in ways that seemed accidental. Supply deliveries would get lost or delayed. Computer systems would develop glitches that wasted our time and resources. Morrison could see where this was leading. Death by 1,000 small cuts was often more effective than direct confrontation. Dr. Torres had studied Vrek's psychology and behavior patterns. She knew exactly how to make us uncomfortable and paranoid without giving us clear targets to attack. The resistance became like a ghost that we could feel but never catch. "Give me an example," Morrison said. Our soldiers would hear sounds in empty buildings that might have been voices or might have been wind through broken windows. They would find evidence that someone had been in their quarters while they were on patrol, but nothing would be missing or damaged. They would see faces in crowds that seemed familiar, but could never identify specific individuals. Zektar's voice became almost a whisper. The worst part was the way ordinary objects became potential threats. A coffee cup left on a table might contain poison, or it might just be a coffee cup. A child's toy abandoned in the street might be a bomb, or it might be harmless. We started to see danger everywhere, even when there was none. Morrison understood this type of psychological warfare. It was designed to wear down enemy morale and make them afraid of their own shadows. After 2 months, our soldiers were requesting transfers to combat zones because they preferred fighting real enemies to dealing with the constant uncertainty of New Geneva. Some of our best veterans were developing stress disorders from the pressure of never knowing when or where the next attack would come. "What kinds of attacks were they?" Morrison asked. That was the genius of Dr. Torres' strategy. Most of the attacks were not designed to kill our soldiers, but to make them miserable and ineffective. Food supplies would be contaminated with substances that caused stomach problems but were not deadly. Water systems would be altered to create bad smells and tastes. Air conditioning would malfunction during the hottest days. Zektar sat down heavily. The resistance also used our own protocols against us. They would create false emergency situations that forced us to respond according to our training. While we were dealing with a fake chemical spill in one district, they would be conducting real operations somewhere else. Morrison was impressed by the sophistication of this civilian resistance. It sounded more like a military operation than a popular uprising. Dr. Torres had turned the entire city into a weapon. Every street, every building, and every system was part of her defense network. The civilians acted like they were cooperating with us during the day, but at night they became our enemies. We could never tell who was a threat and who was innocent. "How did it end?" Morrison asked. After 8 months, our commander requested permission to withdraw from New Geneva. His official report said that the occupation was draining too many resources and personnel for the strategic value of the colony. The real reason was that his soldiers were becoming unreliable due to psychological stress. Zektar looked at Morrison with an expression that might have been shame. 50,000 professional Vrek soldiers were defeated by 2 million human civilians who never fired a shot at us. They used our own minds against us and made us beat ourselves. Morrison felt a mix of admiration and sadness. The people of New Geneva had found a way to resist occupation without resorting to violence, but the psychological cost on both sides must have been enormous. "What happened to Dr. Torres?" Morrison asked. "She disappeared during the final weeks of occupation. Some reports said she had been evacuated by human special forces. Others claimed she had never existed and was just a myth created by the resistance. I believe she was real, because no myth could have organized such an effective campaign." Zektar stood up and faced Morrison directly. "The occupation of New Geneva taught me that humans can turn any situation into a battlefield. Even when you are defeated and occupied, you find ways to continue fighting. You use your intelligence and creativity to make your enemies defeat themselves. It sounds like psychological warfare taken to an extreme level, Morrison said. Yes, but it was more than that. It was a demonstration that humans fight for principles and ideas, not just territory and resources. The people of New Geneva could have accepted occupation and lived comfortable lives under Vrek's rule. Instead, they chose to resist because they believed their freedom was worth more than their comfort. Morrison could see that this experience had affected Zektar deeply. The alien seemed to understand that he had witnessed something beyond normal: military conflict. After New Geneva, I began to understand that fighting humans was not just about winning battles or controlling territory. It was about competing with a species that valued abstract concepts like freedom and dignity more than physical safety or material comfort. This made them unpredictable and dangerous in ways that no amount of military training could prepare us for. Zektar's voice became thoughtful. The civilians of New Geneva never tried to kill us, but they destroyed our confidence and our sense of control. They proved that an occupied population could still resist effectively if they were willing to sacrifice their comfort for their principles. This was a lesson that changed how the Vrek's empire viewed human resistance movements. Zektar fell silent after finishing his story about New Geneva. Morrison watched the alien warrior sit quietly in his cell for several minutes, as if gathering strength for what he needed to say next. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved closer to the cell, entrance sensing that something important was about to happen. "Those are the stories I needed to share with you," Zektar finally said. 4 battles where I learned that humans fight wars differently than any other species in the galaxy. But you must understand that these stories are not just entertainment or historical curiosity. They are warnings about what the Vrek's empire has discovered about your people. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of warnings?" he asked. "My commanders have analyzed every battle, every engagement, and every conflict between our species over the past 10 years. They have reached conclusions that terrify our military leadership and our political rulers. The Vrek's empire is facing an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional warfare." Zektar stood up and moved to the center of his cell. "Humans fight with a combination of technological adaptation, psychological insight, and moral complexity that makes them unpredictable opponents. Where other species follow established military doctrines, humans improvise and innovate in real time during battles." Rodriguez stepped forward with her recording equipment. Morrison could see that she understood the importance of what they were hearing. "But the technology and tactics are not the real problem," Zektar continued. "The real problem is that humans fight for reasons that go beyond military logic. You fight to protect concepts and ideas that other species consider less important than survival itself." Morrison crossed his arms. "What do you mean by that?" he asked. At Kepler Station, Captain Wright could have evacuated the civilians and saved thousands of lives. Instead, she chose to defend the station because she believed that some things are worth dying for. In the jungle on Tau Ceti, Sergeant Phillips could have avoided contact and waited for reinforcements. Instead, she chose to engage because she believed her mission was more important than her safety. Zektar's voice became more intense. "Admiral Carter at Proxima could have retreated and preserved his fleet for a more favorable battle. Dr. Torres, in New Geneva, could have accepted occupation and protected her people from hardship. But humans consistently choose to fight, even when retreat or surrender would be more logical." Morrison was beginning to understand what Zektar was really telling him. This was not just about individual battles, but about fundamental differences between human and Vrek's thinking. Your species fights like every battle might be your last, but also like you have nothing to lose. This gives you a resilience and creativity that pure military training cannot replicate. You see opportunities where other species see only defeat. You find hope where others find only despair. Rodriguez spoke for the first time during the conversation. Are you saying that the Vrex Empire cannot defeat humanity? She asked. Zektar turned to look at her. I am saying that the Vrex Empire has concluded that traditional military victory over humans is impossible. Every time we think we understand your tactics, you develop new ones. Every time we believe we have superior technology, you find ways to turn our advantages into weaknesses. Morrison felt a mix of pride and concern. Pride because his species had proven so resilient, but concern about what this might mean for the future of the war. The psychological impact on Vrex forces has been devastating, Zektar continued. Our soldiers are trained to fight disciplined, predictable enemies. Fighting humans is like battling chaos itself. Our warriors develop stress disorders and lose confidence in their abilities and equipment. So what does the Vrex Empire plan to do about this problem? Morrison asked. Zektar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, somehow more personal and less formal. That is why I am here, Commander Morrison. That is why I requested to speak with you specifically. I am not just a prisoner sharing war stories. I am an official representative of the Vrex High Command. Morrison felt shock run through his body. Rodriguez stepped back and reached for her communication device. I carry authorization to begin preliminary discussions about ending this conflict between our species. The Vrex Empire has concluded that continuing this war will result in massive losses for both sides with no clear victory possible for either. Morrison stared at the alien warrior with new understanding. You are here to discuss peace terms, he said. I am here to discuss the possibility of peace, Zektar corrected. But first, your leaders need to understand what they are really fighting against. The Vrex Empire is not just another aggressive neighbor that can be defeated and controlled. We are a species that has conquered half the galaxy through military force and technological superiority. Zektar moved closer to the cell barrier. But we have never faced an enemy like humanity before. Your species represents an evolutionary step in warfare that makes traditional military thinking obsolete. You fight with your minds, your hearts, and your spirits as much as with your weapons and ships. Morrison realized that everything was about to change. These stories had not been shared for entertainment or even education. They had been carefully chosen examples designed to demonstrate human capabilities to someone who needed to understand them. The High Command has studied every aspect of human warfare and society. They have concluded that humans cannot be conquered in the traditional sense because you will never stop adapting and resisting. The only way to defeat humanity would be to destroy your entire species, and that would be genocide on a scale that even the Vrex Empire finds unacceptable. Rodriguez looked at Morrison with wide eyes. The implications of what they were hearing would reshape the entire war. So instead of continuing a conflict that cannot be won through force, the Vrex Empire is prepared to discuss alternatives. Trade, agreements, territorial boundaries, technological exchanges, and military cooperation against common enemies. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These discussions would have to involve the highest levels of human government and military command, he said. Yes, and that is why I have shared these stories with you. Your leaders need to understand that this offer comes from a position of respect rather than weakness. The Vrex Empire is not surrendering or admitting defeat. We are acknowledging that humanity has earned the right to be treated as equals rather than enemies. Zektar sat back down and looked at both humans. The stories I have told you demonstrate why continuing this war would be pointless and destructive for both our species. Humans have proven that they cannot be defeated through conventional means. The Vrex Empire has proven that they cannot be ignored or dismissed. Morrison knew that his next words would be among the most important he had ever spoken. If I arrange for you to meet with our senior commanders, will you be prepared to discuss specific terms and conditions? He asked. I am prepared to begin discussions that could lead to peace, Zektar replied. But both sides will need to approach these talks with the understanding that we are no longer enemies seeking victory, but potential allies seeking mutual benefit. Morrison looked at Rodriguez, who nodded slowly. They both understood that they had just witnessed the beginning of something that could change the course of galactic history. The tales of war have become the foundation for peace, Morrison said quietly. Perhaps, Zektar replied. But first, both our species must learn that true strength sometimes comes from choosing not to fight, rather than proving that you can win.